that we got this vaccine. And now they live in a world of shame, where they know it never could stop transmission, where they know they're seeing blood clots and heart attacks and all sorts of issues. And yet they're like, why did you do this to us? No one trusts me now. What's going on now? You see, the government so totally overstepped its bounds. Then the pharmaceutical industry so marionetted the WHO and all the world powers, so controlled that it became obvious they were there. We suddenly said, normal governments don't do this. Normal people don't do this. This isn't how science is supposed to work. You're not supposed to tell me something that's absolutely not true. What happened to the scientific method? Well, there's been another event that's happened just this last week up in Canada that I think may be the absolute death nail to authoritarian governments, the pharmaceutical control over the world as we know it. It happened up in Canada. One of the most outrageous, unbelievable, sad, horrific, tragic stories that we've ever seen, especially for those of us that care about animals. This is what happened in an ostrich farm just this last week. Take a look at this.
Breaking news out of British Columbia.
The remote community of Edgewood, BC finds itself at the heart of a dispute.
Here at Universal Ostrich Farm, these roughly 400 ostriches have made headlines. They're supposed to be killed.
For nearly 10 months, owners of the Universal Ostrich Farm have been fighting to save their birds after 2 tested positive for avian flu and dozens died.
The CFIA's argument essentially has always been, once birds test positive for avian flu, that entire flocks be killed to prevent the spread of the virus.
The remaining flock of 300 to 400 ostriches has been healthy for more than 250 days since then, and they claim the birds now have herd immunity to the disease.
We've been fighting for retesting. We just want an opportunity to retest these animals.
American radio host and billionaire John Katzmatidis, along with Dr. Mehmet Oz, now the U.S. Medicare administrator, held a news conference Monday asking that the FDA be allowed to test the birds.
People have traveled from around BC and across the country. They say they're here to protect the animals.
A nearly year-long legal battle finally ended on Thursday, allowing the agency to proceed.
The agency concluded the most appropriate and humane option was to use professional marksmen.
Supporters of the farm could be heard yelling, condemning the cull.
The farm owners say some of the birds have been with them for decades.
This whole thing has been a masterclass in how not to handle conflict.
They come here, make a massacre of healthy animals.
What a lot of Canadians now see is they see this government overreach. They see it as something that should never have happened.
This is one of the biggest crimes in Canadian history.
I'm joined now by Katie Pasitny, who works at the farm. Your mother, my understanding, owns the farm, so this is very close to you. Obviously, you're emotional. I can't even imagine watching this. What are your thoughts right now as you reflect on this horrific event?
On November 6th, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency waged war on our family. And they waged war on our farm in a peaceful valley with over 300 healthy, prehistoric, sentient beings that had names, they had personalities, they had been in our family for decades. They were our identity. And not one of those animals were ever tested. Not one of those ostriches that got gunned down by cowards in the middle of the night, not one of those animals had ever been tested. So you tell me how we get ahead by doing something like this. You tell me, how does a family or a country come back from a massacre, a barbaric massacre like this, treating life like it doesn't matter, like heartbeats don't exist, that emotions and livelihoods of farmers that have dedicated their lives to, some of them nutritional food supply, some of them science and innovation, some of them they're pets. And in Canada, it's like we've lost all meaning for what life means, for what life is. These animals were tortured by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Our family has been terrorized by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for over almost 11 months. Terrorized. There's been no transparency. There's been no innovation. There's been no willingness to cooperate or collaborate with us and work with us. A simple test could have stopped one of the most heinous barbaric acts against animals in Canadian history. A simple test. And there's no going back from this, but the one thing Canadian Food Inspection Agency did, they exposed themselves. On November 6th, Canada woke up the world some behind TV screens and computer screens, but there were hundreds here that they will never ever, we'll have PTSD for the rest of our lives for that gunfire, that rapid gunfire, taking away lives of animals that were put in a kill pen and made to watch each other die, tripping over each other's bodies from the people. They trusted humans. We made them trust humans because we loved them and we taught them to trust humans. They were designed to run away from predators, running 45 miles an hour out of when they were afraid. And they would have been running in that pen, hitting and bouncing off each other. And instead of running from predators, they got killed by, I guess, one of the biggest predators right now is humans. And it was a barbaric, needless act. And as this story goes, we're getting people that are even phoning truckers that were bringing hay in our farm and finding out that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency was having such a hard time even finding that hay to build that kill pen that they used my name. They used my name to buy that hay, to build that kill pen, tricking people into thinking they were trucking hay that I ordered for bedding.
Wow.
And then that truck driver got here and he saw what the bales were being used for, and his trucking company said to get out of here. And the RCMP held him hostage here until he unloaded his hay. They say that this is about virus. If you watch every video for the past month, you will see that this has nothing to do about a virus.
Well, I mean, that's something that we talk a lot about on this show, and I think is what this story is really about, is what they've just exposed. This, what's it called? It's not the FDA and the CDC. It's the name of the group that did this.
Canadian Food Inspection Agency.
So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency essentially just showed the world that they are not a scientific organization. They use science to bring authoritarian, pressure and power upon innocent people. Yeah. But it is clear. Let's go back to when it started. 11 months ago, my understanding is a few of your flock contracted avian flu, which they've been trying to hype the fear of bird flu around the world as the next big pandemic. But you had a couple of birds get sick. Is that correct?
Yeah, we actually had 69 die, but we were a flock well over 400, almost 500.
Right.
And then so what happened was more than 3/4 of our farm never got sick. And through our legal advancement that we've done, we found out that it started to make sense because more than half of our farm experienced these same symptoms in 2020. But those ostriches, we lost 10 at the time. We got a vet to come on board, and obviously we did our due diligence as a farm, and those tests came back positive for Pseudomonas bacteria, and that was done off our proper tissue sample test, not a PCR test. Now, speed up to 2024, we start seeing some of these same symptoms that presented themselves in 2020, but they were only identifiable and only in the ostriches that have been on our farm 2020 after. So that makes sense because our ostriches from 2020 prior had immunity. So they weren't getting sick. Their firewall was active, it was working, and they weren't getting sick. So again, we contacted our vet at the time. It was holidays, so it was really hard to get hold of him. And we were just waiting a call back, but we did our own quarantining, our own cleaning of the dishes. You start your own process being a farmer. And then an anonymous call went into Canadian Food Inspection Agency saying they were sure we had avian influenza. And then that's where this all started, was we allowed them into our farm. We allowed them to take those 2 PCR tests and run them at 39 cycles. We allowed them to take our tests and go to the Abbotsford lab unknowingly that was an unaccredited lab to test for H5N1. And 41 minutes after that test result came back from a non-accredited lab, they signed our kill order. Courtney Fotheringham signed our kill order. Yeah, knowing that we had science, knowing that we had research, knowing that these animals hit herd immunity, knowing that we were doing a great job here. We were isolated. We're not in a city or a major center. We were no threat. They don't fly. And they also had a 5.5-hour Zoom call with us, which was more like an interrogation. They wanted all of our science, all of our research. They wanted our business plan. They wanted all of our vets we've spoke to. They wanted to know everything. And after they knew everything, they still decided, we're not interested. They got all die. We went through exemption packages. We tried to do everything. But again, the CFIA was giving us exemption packages based on poultry, a commercial poultry facility, which we're not. The exemption packages listed turkeys, geese, ducks, and chickens. Not one mention of an emu, a rhea, an ostrich. And so we kept saying, we cannot work with these questions. They don't pertain to our farm. And they just kept threatening, if you don't answer these questions, then you're in non-compliance, and they all die anyway. On January 2nd, we got a letter that said we qualify for special rare genetics. In 8 days, somehow we lost the qualification for that by just them deciding that they're understaffed and they don't want to take the tests. So January 10th, we were given a notice that by February 1st, we were supposed to kill every one of these animals ourselves and bury them in our hayfield. So from January 10th to February 1st, we were the experts in handling a virus, a supposed virus. But then after February 1st, when we became non-compliant, then it became that we were non-compliant and, comply or die. And that's what the race that we've been in since January 10th. It's been comply or die up to this point.
And you've been fighting it for obviously months and months and months. We're 11 months out. So any issue that would have existed is gone now. Anyone knows anything about the science. And you would think we want to live in a world where, we've built herd immunity, where those that have immunity, which your flock clearly does now. And, if the thought was it was a wild bird, a duck or something that came in and infected your ostriches, it had its effect. But now you are holding down the future of health, which is all of your birds, if science works the way it has since the dawn of man and everything we now know to be true, these beautiful birds are holding down health. There's not another wild bird that can probably infect them for quite some time until a real, evolution happens with that virus. So none of this is scientific. So do you feel like they're just following through because they don't want anyone like you to ever resist again? Like, it won't matter if you ride us out. It won't matter if we lose to the science and the timing. Do you feel like you're being made an example of here?
Oh yeah, they wanted to say that we were setting a dangerous precedent, that farmers would now start to fight their culls. But they were setting the most dangerous precedent of all, and you've just nailed it, is that antibodies don't exist, that natural immunity doesn't exist, herd immunity doesn't exist, and that is what they're teaching the world. And that is the most dangerous precedent of all, because by stamping out, it sounds really strong, but when you pair it out with stamping out natural immunity and humanity's at risk, it doesn't sound so pretty. And that's what we're doing, is we're losing our generational farmers, our lineage, we're losing our genetics, we're losing our biodiversity in all of our livestock and our animals, and that is going to lead to a catastrophic failure of a chain of events. And that will put humanity at risk, and it will make you and me and my kids and my grandkids fully reliant on vaccinations for survival, because there is no more natural immunity. They want to say that this was about virus. This was not about virus. This is about a family that had a therapeutic advantage in the industry that would have made, Big Pharma, we would have put them at risk of losing money, and holding on to that tight threshold of vaccines for health. Therapeutics are just, it's a natural way of using the antibodies out of the ostrich eggs, that we have big scientific proof that their antibodies are so robust, and we have 100 chicken eggs worth of antibodies in one ostrich egg. They're prehistoric by need for a reason. They have such an amazing immune system. And then again, the virus.
So you were actually working, just because I read this in the article, and I saw one of the last sentences in one of the articles talked about how you were actually looking into the therapeutic value of these antibodies and these birds that are now totally immune. They're producing animals that are in the egg yolks of these ostriches, and so you were starting to look at, is there a natural way we could use this? Where obviously drugs wouldn't be involved, vaccines. I immediately just thought, this is where you've stepped into a danger zone with pharma. Right now you're competing. Now you have a natural way that maybe we can look at. Are there in these egg yolks and these birds that have gotten through this? Is our future? Is there a way to bring them? When you look at, is there a way to bring immunity through these antibodies that are now being found, prolific inside of the egg yolks of your healthy ostriches?
Yeah, and there was. We were at the usable stages of science. We were offering the Canadian government stockpiles of avian influenza H5N1 antibodies to begin to start to mitigate the risk that we have been seeing across the world, across Canada first, but to start to use these antibodies. And they said there was a no. So one thing where we go along the further though, there's so many things that don't make sense. I found that in March, so this was happening in January, February, we're disclosing all of our details, our research, our information, the importance of our antibodies of these eggs, and showing them our test results from a clinic in Quebec called Immune Biosolutions. Now, in March, while they're trying to fight to kill every one of our animals rather than keep them for research and collaboration and work with us, they gave almost $1 million grant to a lab in was this one in Quebec, named Lafont Medical, to create one of the products that we said we were creating, which was a diagnostic test kit for farmers to use using antibodies. So while we were offering the collaborative innovation and the science for free, they went and gave a grant for almost $1 million to Lafont Medical, a private lab. So, you know, here again, so now we're looking at our research going to be used somewhere. Again, I can't say that it's our, you know, this is in our opinion, but at the same time, we're noticing while we were under a stay order of the Supreme Court, we were watching the numbers of our animals decrease in our fields, and we didn't know why. Now, some people think we're crazy. Canadian Food Inspection Agency said nothing left here dead. So the one thing that we can hypothetically guess at is, where did they take some of our older ostriches? Did they steal them? And are they in Ontario or Quebec? And do they have our lineage and our genetics from our decades-old, strong, robust, beautiful ostriches from around the world? Do they have those birds still alive? Because they would never. We even opened up an investigation to look. We wanted to count our ostriches. That's it. We just wanted to be able to go in with a vet and count how many ostriches were there. Canadian Food Inspection Agency would not allow us. So we started doing aerial shots from up and around the mountains.
So they were blocking you from contact? Like you weren't able to get into your own flocks at a certain point?
No. September 22nd, they came in with these warrants to search. And when they gave those to us, they took over complete seizure of our whole property and our animals. However, on the 22nd, we received an email from Courtney Fotheringham from Canadian Food Inspection Agency asking us, as a farm, to continue to feed and water the animals to support them, because then they would just continue on with preparing for the worst outcome. Now, we never challenged, we never fought them setting up. We were waiting for a Supreme Court answer, and so we were staying in the pens to feed them, but we were being told to get out. So my mom and I decided to stay in there and fight for the right to feed them and keep them calm while their world was going to turn upside down. And we said, just please let us feed them. And they finally agreed. We told them about that email. They agreed we could feed them. We go off in our farm truck and we are feeding for about a half an hour. And then our farm truck is surrounded by 4 police cop cars and a van. And they tell us that we're under arrest. So my mom and I were arrested for feeding our animals. And now they're trying to charge us with a criminal act under the Section 35, Paragraph 2 of the Animal Health Act. Get this one. Charge us criminally under the Animal Health Act that we were impeding an officer from doing their duties.
Wow.
You can't even
it's
make
absolutely
this up.
You can't. It's horrible. I mean, I don't want to make it political, but you know, I went to film school up in Vancouver, and I remember years and years ago just thinking, wow, you know, it's beautiful. Socialism looks like it works. Yeah. And now I will say we are seeing, and all through COVID, we saw this, how few rights you have in Canada. When an authoritarian government decides it's right, it can take 2 PCR tests and destroy a livelihood, a living, a family, and perhaps even the future of science as we know it. An investigation, and that's what's happened here. So take me to November 3rd, I think you said it is. What was that day like as it's become clear? I mean, were you aware that there's just no stopping? At what point did you know we've lost this? They're coming in, they're going to kill our birds.
It was November 6th morning, and we got our decision from Supreme Court that they decided to not hear our case. And at that moment, we knew that there was no stopping. We asked them if we could say goodbye to our animals, and they said no. We asked them after they barbarically gunned them down if we could pray over them, and they said no. Their reason being, they said that they were scared. They were scared from us. And we said, could you imagine how every one of these animals felt in the middle of the night when the gunshots started in the dark? They were supposed to be resting. And instead, they were running into one another, watching their brothers and sisters die that they've been with for 30 years. And they were looking for humans to protect them because, like I said, we taught them that humans were safe. And we taught them that they could trust us. And they murdered my mom's identity that night. They murdered our family's identity that night. And they've scarred a world forever. We have calls coming from all over the world that watched that. And everybody agrees that maybe God just needed to take home one of the biggest sacrifices to make one of the biggest changes in the world, because we need to start to lead this world by compassion. We need to start to bring back conscience, and we have to bring back unity. And the one best thing to do that is animals, because I think everybody can agree that no animal deserves to get barbarically gunned down in the middle of the night. And we can be their voices. And by their heinous, this act, this murder that happened on our farm with those bullets ringing out in the middle of the night, 900 to 1,000 gunshots. We'll never sleep without thinking of what that sounded like. So they didn't even warn us. The RCMP didn't warn us it was going to start. They trapped our supporters up on the highway, wouldn't let them back down our road to get to their motorhomes so that they could go and they didn't have to listen to it. They trapped them for hours on the highway listening to the birds running and gunshots. This is something that will never go away. And I pray that the world never forgets about what happened November 6th, because this has to change how we see leadership, how we display humanity. And we have such a big opportunity here with the world being in such a vulnerable space to create true leadership and bring true leadership forward. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency had to come back in the morning. Those professional marksmen, they call themselves, they had to come back in the morning and finish shooting a couple of our ostriches that laid there in pain all night. We heard the gunshots ourselves. They're lying, and they say that they didn't. They lie. That's what they do the best. They lie and kill. Canadian Food Inspection Agency lies and kills. They do not tell the truth. They are not transparent. They do not heal. They do not protect. They do not preserve. They lie and they kill. That is what their job is. And we need a new agency that knows how to protect life, preserve life, and support our agricultural sector, as well as you know, I have empathy for humanity.
Well, you know, we won't forget the story. I think the images of those ostriches being massacred, perfectly healthy, as you pointed out, hadn't had any illness from the original situation. 2 PCR tests. You were never allowed to test any of the healthy animals as they were there. And, you know, and now what we're looking at is an anti-science regime that uses science as a weapon, but won't actually produce science, courtrooms that don't care about actually the science, and we are all being governed by these things. It's around the world. I do want to recognize that Dr. Oz, the head of CMS, reached out. I know that he had offered to take the ostriches on his own property. Robert Kennedy Jr., the head of HHS in America, wrote a letter to the agricultural minister saying, please don't do this. The science will do the testing for you. America offered, our regulatory agencies offered to go in and test every bird. What would that cost? Nothing.
Yeah.
And instead, none of that happened. And so I think this is a face of socialism. I think it's the face of authoritarianism. And I think it's the face of things to come in the future if we do not stand up together as people and share this very important story. I'm so sorry to you and your family. But I have the same prayer that you do, that somehow I hope that this horrific incident, wakes us up to, the cruelty and the lack of science that these regulatory agencies are running by. It's not science, it's control.
It's control.
And that control must be broken, or we're going to be broken as a people, as a species. Such a sad story. Please give your best to your mother and everyone there that had to go through this, and know that we support you. We're praying for you. If there's anything we can do. The website for anyone that wants to get involved in this conversation, saveourostriches.com. I just think it's something that we've got to be aware of, because it can affect us in so many different ways. And the next pandemic, this fear, this disease driving burden of how they want to control us, it's so obvious. And the story makes it so obvious.
One last thing, they didn't follow any of their policy here. They were in hazmat suits, not in hazmat suits. People with regular clothes on in the hot zone, taking hay from the hot zone, filling holes for police officers to drive their cars on. They've exploded all the bales that they trapped all the ostriches in to kill them. They're all exploded over our hayfield right now with hundreds of ducks in it. So now you have there's your real risk, is the migratory birds. It's not the flightless animals and the animals on people's farms that are the risk. And again, so they haven't even followed any of their protocol. And it just goes to show you that one more layer of why this had nothing to do with the virus, but ultimately control. You're so right.
Katie, thank you for sharing your story with us. As I said before, our prayers are with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Yep. Well, I mean, we've watched this time and time again, and I know we don't want to reflect on COVID, and we don't want to look at the fact that we were all locked down with no science, and you got Tony Fauci questioning me, you're questioning the science. Obviously, that'd be the same situation if they're questioning their food inspection agency, you're questioning the science. There's no science. There's no science in PCR tests or anything. In fact, it's a lot of what we're going to get in today with Jeffrey Jackson. So let's get to it. It's time for the Jackson Report. Hey, Jeffrey. Well, that's an incredibly sad story, but it exemplifies just how insane these government officials are, these regulatory agencies, supposed health departments are around the world. And you're going to get into some of that, so let's get into it.
Yeah, you know, that brought up some uncomfortable memories of the pandemic. I should say the failed pandemic response. And one by one, we're knocking these planks out. And let's knock out the PCR. So she mentioned that PCR test was ramped up. The cycle threshold was ramped up. We know that's a problem.
Yeah.
And this PCR test, it's essentially, for COVID, now bird flu, it's maybe the best that governments have. It's a failed technology. And what was that used for? Let's look at Germany. Now, Germany was an example, but this was happening in Canada, the United States. Here's the headlines in 2021 and 2022. Germany to extend lockdown until mid-February, malls curfew. Here's another one, schools will close in Germany as cases surge. Just to remember what that was like. You wake up and you're locked down. And the primary technology to use, the government's used to lock people down, keep them locked down, keep them in, when they fly into an airport, they have to be in a quarantine hotel, was the PCR test. And we tried to warn people in 2021. This is what it sounded like.
All right.
So in January, a German virologist named Christian Drosten, he created a new laboratory assay to detect the coronavirus from the German Center for Infection Research. Now, the breaking news on this is this paper is being contested, as is and by extension, so is this new assay PCR test, tested by PCR as positive when a threshold of 35 cycles or higher is used, as is the case in most laboratories in Europe and the US. The probability that said person is actually infected is less than 3%.
Whoa.
The probability that said result is false positive is 97%.
I have to say, it's weird to watch that. I don't know why in this clip I'm just thinking, as I'm describing all the way back in 2020, California's lockdown, no one can leave. They're stuck on these things. Sorry for any children watching, but there's no other way to describe it.
And now we have the science from Germany, not strangely enough, but ironically enough, where the PCR test came from, Christian Drosten in the German virologist lab. So we have this study now looking at the PCR test, looking back at the PCR test that was used during COVID. And this is a calibration of nucleic acid PCR by antibody IgG test. So what they were doing was they're looking at the PCR test, who was tested.
That was saying it could be as inaccurate as 3%, which I'm sure, some of them were. But now we find out, because they went and tested the actual blood that matched the samples, that it said they were positive. It took all those positive samples then, went and found their real blood and said they weren't positive. 90% of them weren't positive. What does that mean for the world? I mean, it's mind-blowing when you think what we went through, and all of it based on, the worst science of all time.
Yeah, think about this, lockdowns, nursing homes. PCR was used to test infections for the vaccine studies. And so let's go to these researchers again, because they do brilliantly push back here. And they say this: the proportion of the German population with a detectable immune response to SARS-CoV-2 was already substantial by the end of 2020. Approximately 1/4 of the population carried IgG antibodies at that point, following a trajectory determined almost exclusively by natural infections. By the end of 2021, practically the whole German population could be considered IgG positive. But then they wanted to say this: in consequence, German authorities had timely and reliable access to this data, tracking the course of IgG seropositivity, data that were in fact close to being population representative. These data could have served as an objective metric for monitoring the proclaimed epidemic situation of national significance. But they didn't do it. They had access to this. They could have checked. All they cared about is how many tests can you do. That's all they cared about here in the U.S. Just get more tests, more tests. They never decided to check it with, let's look at the blood and see who's actually IgG positive and see how accurate these tests are. They could have done that at any time, and they did not.
But we don't know much about this virus. There's very little we know. What we know is we're not going to look at anything that would give us any information. I want to point out, too, Jeffrey, and I've said it, it's a really good time to say this again for everyone that's watching new. In America, using the same PCR test, just as diabolically, horrifically inaccurate, but you know where you needed to be, where you don't want to have that happening, where they're scrubbing your brain with this stupid, 12-inch long Q-tip. The only place in America that you were guaranteed to never have to stick that swab in your nose. Not preschool. They'll do it to your preschool kid in order to go to preschool. And not Hollywood. I mean, everybody was like, we were doing it once, twice a week. Many people were doing it. There was jobs. I had friends in Hollywood had to do it in the morning and in the afternoon just to the vaccine. The only place they couldn't afford to test anybody was to see if the vaccine actually stopped transmission. They never did PCR tests on anyone in the trial. When the entire point was, can we stop this? You know why? Because they know they would have tested positive and probably been inaccurate. Right? But the one place, when you're like making a product that's going to suddenly stop this pandemic, the only place they weren't testing to see if you were infected was on the people that were getting the test that was supposed to be able to prove it could stop infection. The whole thing is just, it's gross to go back to. It hurts my brain to think about the fact that we went through this and that most of these people, like Tony Fauci and Deborah Birx and everyone involved around the world, they're still walking around with smiles and scarves instead of in jail. It's outrageous.
Let's keep knocking out these planks since we're talking about the science that supposedly saved us from a pandemic, a once-in-a-century pandemic. A lot of the information we look at regarding the COVID vaccine shows that this didn't save millions of lives. There's mounting issues from immune system to myocarditis and everything in between. And we're still finding this out. Yet we see headlines like this from The Independent. COVID jab presents less harm for patients than the virus itself, the study reveals. When I see this, I go, what study are they talking about? Because there's a runny. So the vaccine didn't come out for another till end of December. So you're taking a look at about a year there. And also January 2020, you're talking about no natural immunity, lockdowns, no early treatment, stay at home until you need to put on a ventilator. Literally the height of the failed pandemic policy, hell on earth when it comes to that. And that's when they're saying, we're going to test those people, and we're going to test them against people who received the vaccine starting in, if you go back to that, starting in August 6, 2021 to December 31st, 2022. That's what we're going to test.
So the study group on the unvaccinated is right at the height where all the elderly are dying in old folks' homes. All of that sort of dry grass, if you will, the people that were very, very susceptible to the virus, that had weakened immune systems, they're all dying. That's the group we look at in the unvaccinated group. Then we wait all the way to August, did you say, of 2021 to finally start looking at how the vaccine was working. Okay, got it. Continue on. Track.
Yep. And so the researchers are using this natural.
You're testing their success rate. Okay, got
exactly.
it. Yep.
So let's take a little side trail here to another study just to drive this point home. So it's not just you and I saying this was a bad time. This is the infection dynamics in England for those 23 months. And this is what it talks about in IFR. It says, during 2020, we estimated the IFR, the infection fatality ratio, to be 0.67%, and the IHR, the infection hospitalization ratio, basically who gets hospitalized when they have COVID, to be 2.6%. But by late 2021 and early 2022, the IFR and IHR have both decreased to 0.097% and 0.76% respectively. So you're talking orders of magnitude smaller during that time. Massive momentum for this study. So let's go back to the Lancet study that they're telling us the infection is so dangerous compared to the vaccine, and they produce, with all that data, they produce this graph. This is what's making the headlines here. So when you look at this, you see the red and the green. These are the natural infection, the just natural diagnosis they're saying so bad for us, compared to that blue, which is the vaccination. And you're looking on the left side, you're looking at myocarditis, pericarditis, inflammatory conditions, thrombocytopenia. You can see, according to their chart, that blue line there looks like the vaccine isn't having any issues. In fact, there's some negative efficacy, according to them, for inflammatory conditions. So it's actually helping you. But then you look at the bottom of that chart, and it says outcomes after 6 months of either COVID-19 diagnosis or vaccination. So not only did they not choose that basically year and a half window at the beginning, they chose literally the first 6 months of the pandemic for the infection cohort, and then the first 6 months in 2021 for the vaccination cohort. So they even narrowed that focus even smaller to get this effect. But our data team, our international researchers, took all of the data in this study. We didn't look at time windows. We took it all, and we compared the vaccination versus COVID infection rate. We came up with this graph, which is a little different. You're not going to make those headlines from The Independent with this graph.
No.
You see the
infection. No, moving back to make sure the unvaccinated are right at the height of COVID, and then let's make sure everyone's immune by the time we test the vaccinated group. Well, those numbers looking better. Now we're getting somewhere. Oh, you know what we should do? Instead of having the actual, Band-Aid, which was 2 Pfizer vaccines, let's just start right after the first one, when all was happening was priming. It was the second one did all the difference. So we don't even show any of the data after the second one. Woo-hoo! Now the study's looking good. Unbelievable. Continue on.
They went so out of their way. It's
They study just saying it's going against the mountains of study we've been hearing about. This is how they do it. This is how the CDC have been doing their studies prior to Robert Kennedy Jr. Why do you think Pharma is so pissed he's there? Because the days of the cook-the-book studies are over. They're over. All right? We're going to do real science now. Right? We're going to be not objective. We're just going to open up, be totally objective and say we're not choosing sides. We're putting it all on the table.
And we still have a lot of people to wake up because independent media is now surging. People are still waking up. And the reason we have been behind is because of the censorship. It's really a military-style censorship that we have been facing, and so many others like us have been facing to get this information out. So there's a reason you didn't hear about that 2020 report about PCR testing and about the cycle thresholds and how inaccurate it was, because we were being censored, and so many other people were. And this is the breakdown of how that happened. I want to just paint a picture here in the United States, but this is not just in the U.S., this is in other countries as well. In 2007, you had the Department of Defense. They had a policy memo, a memorandum, and they outlined how to control the internet activity, news. And you can see in this memo, you take this line, it says this policy applies to public affairs, activities, and programs, products, and actions that shape emotions, motives, reasoning, and behaviors of selected foreign entities. And it goes on to say, it is the responsibility of all combatant commanders, that's what they call it, to determine when the internet communications of specific individuals and websites rise to the level equivalent to a news organization. That's us. And so the military says, we want to control your reasoning, your behaviors, your motives, and shape your emotions. So this doesn't just talk about COVID. Think about all the other headlines you're seeing that are emotive, that are shaping people's emotions. Think about this as you go into this. So luckily, that's just for foreign entities, right? Well, in 2013, you had the Obama White House sign the Smith-Munn Modernization Act. So what does that mean? Since 1948, the United States and its military could not use money, taxpayer money, to propagandize American citizens. Well, in 2013, that was reversed, and it was go time. That's that headline here. 2013, U.S. repeals propaganda ban, spreads government-made news to Americans. Just in time for COVID, but our military and our news and our government weren't the only ones doing this. You can see it right bold-faced in the UK in 2020. They put it right out in the open for everyone to see. They said this: the British Army's Information Warfare Unit is helping combat coronavirus misinformation. Great idea. And by 2023, Army's Information Warfare Unit monitored COVID lockdown critics. So they had dossier on people. They were monitoring journalists, monitoring government officials about what they said, trying to censor them. And at the same time, you had fear being pushed into the populations as a